Good morning and welcome back, and I'm going to continue with the exploration of deep water mathematics, and in particular today look at enhancing the equation for the vital that we had arrived at perhaps about a week ago or so. Now recall that there are four components to this equation of the vital, and we have a deepest component that we had designated by a level, meta level 3. So we have at this meta level 3 something that we're calling omnipower, and we had expressed this equation for omnipower as being power in any practical system. So for example, as we consider a continuum from across time-space boundary n, so the area from time-space equal to 0 to some time-space equal to n, we're saying that this power is greater than the product of any resistances that can arise. So that's the physical resistance, the vital resistance, and the mental resistance. And recall that we had arrived at this notion of omnipower by first of all looking at the way that different types of organizations develop regardless of area and regardless of complexity of the organization. And from that we had derived three phases that all these organizations go through if they're sustainable in their progress, and therefore had come up with the notion that there is an implicit order in time that's characterized by this movement from the physical to the vital to the mental. And subsequently we stepped back and asked, what is it about this system that we live in that gives rise to this implicit order in time? And that gave us the sense that there's an implicit order in space. And so as we asked, what is this implicit order in space, we came up with four characteristics that are true of every point in the space. And one of these characteristics we're calling omnipower. So from omnipower we're now deriving, or if you will, we're seeing the family of derivations that result in the vital. And so at meta level 3 we have this point that's really a miracle that has embedded in it these four characteristics, from which omnipower is one characteristic. And then if we ask, alright, so practically what does this tell us about how this omnipower acts within any kind of practical space, we then come up with a meta level 2, and the meta level 2 can be thought of as a set of omnipresence which has elements such as power, courage, adventure, justice, and so on, so amongst many other kinds of elements. And then we ask, or we hypothesize that, alright, so we have these sets of architectural forces, and these architectural forces can define how organizations develop. But our hypothesis is that every single organization is unique. And so at meta level 1, we derived an equation for this uniqueness, and we call this the signature of an organization. And we have a particular kind of signature for those organizations that are more vitally driven. So we designate that by signature to the base V. And we said that that is really equal to a primary characteristic X with a weight A, and a secondary characteristic Y with a weight B, such that this Y and B may repeat themselves from 0 to m times with different y's and b's. So let's just say from 0 to m, and such that x here, this x, is an element from the set of omnipower. So one of these characteristics here, y can be an element from any of the four sets. So the set of omnipower, the set of omnipresence, the set of omniscience, and the set of omniloving. And further, a and b are integers, such that A is greater than B, which basically tells us that X is the primary element and Y, and the number of Y's are all secondary elements. Now we also came up with the component for the outer. So how is it that the vital might appear to us when we first come into contact with it? And so we had the vital outer, which we posited was also a set of characteristics, and the kinds of characteristics that typify this outer vital are things like aggression or self-centeredness or exploitation and so on. So these were the four components that we arrived at that in a sense characterize the possibilities, both what the vital is right now and its possibilities. And further we went on to say that there is an implicit urge in this vital whereby the meta level 1, 2, and 3 begin to incarnate in the outer so that the outer is over time transformed. And this implicit urge we characterize by a function that we call the transformation circle that in itself is modulated by sine En pi. And to just summarize what we mean by the transformation circle, it's depicted by this multi-layered seed, if you will, where the deepest layer is the essence of meta level 3. This is surrounded by meta level 2, which is surrounded by meta level 1, which is surrounded by the outer. And we hypothesize that this seed or this transformation circle is subject to a time action such that initially the vital may be entirely in the outer with the characteristics of the outer, but over time begins to integrate more of the deeper characteristics so that ultimately there's an integration such that meta level 3, 2, and 1 become active in the outer. And the sinusoidal is derived from the fact that this depiction takes place through a sinusoidal wave, which in fact grows, and therefore we have the modulation by E, and as it grows it begins to integrate the deeper layers into the outer, and this whole action takes place within a sphere or a circle, and therefore there's a modulation by pi. Now if we consider how this transformation circle works, then what we really have to see is, what is the condition by which the activity of the dynamics that typify the outer can begin to be replaced by the dynamics of M1. And so there are certain conditions that need to be fulfilled, and we can summarize these conditions by saying that basically there has to be a breakthrough or something greater than, so basically all the patterns of the vital, and here these are the patterns such as aggression, self-centeredness, exploitation, need to be overcome in order that the essence of meta level 1 can become active. So we're saying that this is behind the outer, but for it to become more active in its purity, there needs to be an overcoming of these patterns of the vital. Similarly, to break through from meta level 1 to meta level 2, what we are suggesting is that the signature of the vital has to become a real force. So it's not something that just happens sporadically, but it has to become very consistent with its essence. And then similarly for meta level 2 to break into meta level 3, what we suggest is that this force has to become entirely impersonal. So now there's no sense of self-centeredness, but there's a much wider action in whatever field we might be considering. And integrating this into this equation here, what we can do is say that, so the outer tends towards M1 when we overcome the patterns of the vital. When this happens, then M1 becomes much more active in the outer. Similarly, M1 tends towards M2 when the signature of V becomes a force. When this happens, M2 becomes much more active in the outer. And then M2 will tend towards M3 when this force becomes impersonal. And at that point, M3 will also begin to be much more active in the outer. M3, M2, and M1 may always be active in the outer, and we are never aware of it. It might be sporadic, but it's covered by this dynamic that's depicted by this set of aggression, self-centeredness, and exploitation. However, when we create those conditions and break through to that level, then M1, M2, and M3 can begin to act, change the dynamics of the outer in a very different way. And so when this happens, if these conditions are fulfilled, then what we hypothesize is that the vital is transformed, and we'll depict that by vital to the base t, and this will be characterized by a set which has the characteristics such as this very positive energy, or this incredible support for any kind of endeavor, or this fresh sense of adventure, or an incredible sense of enthusiasm, or just this constant reality of sustainable growth, and so on. So if we think about these characteristics that we're saying would be the result of M1, M2, and M3, then the way that we would integrate this into this equation here is just say that through the action of the transformation circle, the vital outer tends to become vital, this transformed vital, and so we would depict this enhanced equation finally in such a manner so that we have these four components, and we have also this notion of the implicit transformation of these, or the integration of these four, so that the vital outer gets transformed, and through the action of the transformation we end up with a transformed vital which really has a whole set of different characteristics. Now, this has practical implication for any kind of organizational development or organizational design efforts, because if we think about any kind of market or default organization today, and whether here we're talking about organization being at the individual, team, corporate, market, or even at a country level, we perhaps would tend to see a lot more characteristics that automatically happen that are much more of the nature of aggression, self-centeredness, exploitation, and so on. But the whole point is that this can and will be transformed into something very different that's typified by this set here, but those conditions for the transformation are such that the patterns have to be overcome, and then there's the various essences from deeper layers that can become active in the outer. And as we begin to further design organizations and develop organizations, we need to think about how actually this transformation of the vital can effectively take place.